And I told Jay and Brendan and Ryan a few weeks ago that if I can be on Showing Up, come hell or high water, I will be there if at all possible. Because
It's
Kelly
a JD
Reichardt,
special.
it's a JD special. She is absolutely one of my favorite directors working today. If you look back at the InSession film archive, anytime Kelly Reichardt is brought up, you will hear me raving about her. So I had to be here. This was one of my most, if not my most anticipated film of the year. So I made time. Here I am.
Was First Cow your number one?
My number one.
2020?
Yep.
That's right. Yep.
My number
it was
one.
like 2 or 3 or something. But
yeah, love that one. Wendy and Lucy was my favorite film of 2008. I believe it was when that came out. Meek's Cut Off in my top 10 the year that it came out. Certain Women certainly on that list for me as well.
Wendy and Lucy's your fave, right?
Mm-hmm. Of Reichart's films, yes, but I don't know. I keep thinking about First Cow a lot. Like that's a film I go back to often. In time, that might be that I could see that one kind of trumping and becoming my new favorite Reichardt film.
I'll say this about First Cow: it might be her most rewatchable movie.
Yeah, that's true. Certainly more so than something like Old Joy, for example, or even the one that we're about to talk about and Showing Up.
Yes, certainly. I mean, like Meek's Cut Off is a real kind of downer of a movie. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about it. There's certainly I've got some comparisons to talk about between First Cow and this film, and kind of her different philosophies that she's making both of those films and some of her others as well. But it's an interesting thing to discuss.
It is. Well, let's first introduce Showing Up. So obviously this is directed by the great Kelly Reichardt. It is written by Reichardt as well as John Raymond. It stars the wonderful Michelle Williams, Hong Chow, who had a fantastic year last year, starting off 2023 in a great way with this film as well. John Magaro, speaking of First Cow, he makes an appearance in this as well. Judd Hirsch has a little role here. If you're not familiar with Showing Up, and for many of you listening, maybe just checking this out, maybe you don't know what it is, and I certainly don't blame you, but it is about a sculptor who is preparing to open a new show, and she tries to work amidst the daily dramas of family and friends in the midst of all of that. So I gave my thoughts on Kelly Reichardt. I certainly love her. I guess before we get into Showing Up, though, your experience with Reichardt may be a little different than me. What do you think?
No, Kelly Reichardt is without a doubt one of the best, most unique voices in modern cinema. I don't know that I love her quite as much as you do, but she is. Anytime a Kelly Reichardt movie comes out, and I was kind of late to the party. I probably didn't get into her movies until 2, 3, 4 years ago or something. But she is a must-watch. I mean, she's appointment viewing anytime one of her movies comes out. So it doesn't matter what it's about. Just you don't even have to tell me the plot of the movie, who's in it, whatever. Kelly Reichardt's making a movie. I'm there. Let's do it. I'm pumped. And I was very excited for this one. I mean, it's, again, First Cow was in my top 5. I want to say it was in my top 3 of that year. And so certainly drafting off of that into her next film, it's immediately, I'm pumped. I'm excited. I'm ready to see this thing. Doesn't matter what it is. New Kelly Reichardt movie. Let's go.
Let's go. Well, all right. Well, I think with all of that laid out on the table, then what did you think of Showing Up?
You know, it's like I said, I mean, we're dealing with a really unique voice here. I think Reichardt's pacing is very far from traditional. It is very unique to her. Her themes are rich and complex, and both of those traits really remain present in Showing Up. But I got to say, I didn't find myself quite as engrossed with this film as I have been with much of her other work. Okay. And I kind of understand that the very slow build of this film, the snowball structure of the film where you're just rolling downhill and the emotions get bigger and bigger, it's kind of built into the movie. But it takes a little while to find its clever, wry, groove. And it's really interesting that after the more narratively driven first, at least by Kelly Reichardt standards, which is, she is not the most narratively driven filmmaker of all time. And that's,
Not
I
at
think,
all.
to her
Yeah.
benefit. It makes her films totally different and fascinating. But after First Cow, which had a lot more story than some of her other movies, Showing Up is really a return to her specific, deliberately undramatic works. Stuff like Wendy and Lucy, stuff like Old Joy, more in that vein. But it all does eventually culminate in this fascinatingly pitched finale that maybe for the first time in her work verges on magical realism that I found really enjoyable. I thought that was a really nice touch to the film.
Yeah.
Again, the wind-up wasn't entirely my cup of tea, although I appreciated a lot of the very, very, very dry, low-key sense of humor. And there is a lot to appreciate about the film. For me, first and foremost, it's the Michelle Williams performance, which I think is brilliantly understated. There's it's so interesting to see her in The Fabelmans, where she's very big, she's really going for it, and then in this film she is almost just a blank slate. But you do see this build underneath her of this anxiety, of this anger, of these little things chipping away at her stillness. And she always is able to maintain this facade throughout. It's almost an embodiment of Kelly Reichardt's movies themselves, which are so still and so understated and so unassuming. But they pack underneath this power to them. And I think Williams captures that element of Kelly Reichardt's films so brilliantly in this movie. It's such an unglamorous performance that does squeeze a really impressive amount of humor from this seemingly straight-faced movie. And I do think there's a lot to unpack with the themes of this film on the artistic process, the concept of family, both found family and family by blood. But the film failed to really entirely get its hooks in me with the texture and the raw emotion that I'm accustomed to from Reichardt. Still a good film, no doubt about it. I recommend anybody who is connected with Reichardt's films at all, absolutely go seek this thing out. And it's very possible that, again, with the tempo of this movie, the very idiosyncratic pitch that this film has, even by Reichardt standards, it's stripped down. And because of that, maybe it will get better for me on subsequent viewings, but this is lower tier Reichardt. Again, we're grading on a curve because she's made basically nothing but great films. And she's remains one of the best directors working. But that was kind of my takeaway as I was leaving the theater.
Yeah, I mean, and as I noted, I just left the theater about an hour or so as of the time we are recording this. So my thoughts on this will likely evolve. In fact, I was thinking about how maybe we could do a Showing Up Part 2, maybe some Patreon bonus content in a few weeks, because I haven't had time to gather my thoughts, to write them down in a cohesive way. And these are always my favorite conversations that we have each year when a Kelly Reichardt film comes out. I know that I'm certainly going to have more to talk about with this film as the weeks go on. It does sound like I'm a lot higher on this film than you. I really liked it a lot. In fact, I might go as far as to say that this is my favorite film of the year so far. I enjoyed it. But to your point, this film is very contemplative. It often pauses just to observe our central characters here in the moment as they're creating art or simply indulging in whatever it is that they're doing. And it does render this gentle quality that we see in a lot of Reichardt films. It's very tender. This is also very subtly funny, as you were talking about. There's some great dry humor to this film that you don't often see in her films. This harkens back to maybe something like Old Joy. I don't know if we've seen humor like this from her since that film. And I just love that this is at its core in terms of pacing and rhythm. It's a slice of life movie, but it's one that's the most sliciest I've ever seen, perhaps. This takes that notion to the nth degree. But that's what I love about Reichardt's films, as you're talking about. Like, she isn't interested in conventional plot or drama or overt emotion as much as she is in character and theme and how those two things become intertwined. And again, as I'm processing that now out of the theater, that was easily the biggest takeaway for me here. Now, I'm still trying to figure out what all of that really is here, and perhaps this conversation will help solidify some of that for me, or again, in the next few weeks, as we maybe get to this film again sometime later. But I do love the contrast that we see between Lizzie, the Michelle Williams character here, and Joe, played by Hong Chow. Both of those performances are fantastic. I definitely have a lot more to say about them as we go. But there is this interesting juxtaposition between the two, and that Lizzie is introverted. She lacks confidence. Her loneliness is certainly tangible. Whereas with Joe, she's more extroverted. She has these two shows coming up. People admire her artwork. She's more social. But perhaps the juxtaposition that resonates the most for me is how Reichardt exposes amiability, in the sense that Joe comes off as a good friend to Lizzie. She's the one who finds this pigeon and decides to bandage it up. But in reality, Joe is not always that kind to Lizzie. She's a terrible landlord. Perhaps we can get into that as well. Her remarks toward Lizzie's artwork could be interpreted as patronizing. She essentially pawns off this pigeon to Lizzie unexpectedly. And then you flip the other side of that coin, and Lizzie at times can seem vulnerable and perhaps jealous of Joe, and certainly brash in some scenes. But underneath, there's an earnestness in her attention and her intentions. She obviously cares about her artwork and wants it to look a certain way. There's a diligence there. She cares about her brother Sean and wants to make sure that he's okay. There's a couple of times where she just wants her family to pick up the phone. So like there's, this interesting maneuvering that Reichardt does here in terms of those two, and how on the surface they might convey a certain emotion, but as the film goes on, it subverts that in these fascinating ways. And then you couple that with Reichardt's filmmaking and craft, and I love how she uses the camera. I love the editing here. Again, it's arresting in a very understated way that I tend to love. Like slow cinema, give me that all day, and Reichardt's simply one of the best at it.